Hey guys, Seb from exploreGO here, and today we're joined by Aaron Halstead, one of the founders of exploreGO, Bianca Barton, the New Zealand Business Development Manager at Ponant, and Francesca Ethorn, Chief Operations Officer at the Antarctic Heritage Trust. So during today's webinar, we'll be learning what to expect, where to book, and how to make the most of your voyage to the world's southernmost continent. So without further ado, Aaron Halstead is going to lead us off and take us on a journey of what we can expect when visiting the Antarctic continent and what you can do there and how to make it all happen. Aaron, over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Seb. All right, so what I'm going to do, everyone, is take you on a bit of a discovery journey of Antarctica. And I'm going to do the intro to why Antarctica and what we're likely to see in Antarctica as we sort of explore there. And if you've never been there before, just really to showcase how amazing Antarctica is. So what we'll do here is we'll start off discovering in Antarctica. And I thought I'd just put a map up of the continent because it's a huge place. And I think if you just look at this map a little bit, if you're coming from New Zealand or Australia or South Africa, you can see it's a very long way. It's about, a good 6 days at sea, 7 days at sea from New Zealand or Australia. Hence why a lot of expeditions go from South America. As you can see, the southern tip of South America there is quite close to the peninsula. And that's one of the most amazing places to go if you've never been there before. So a lot of people ask, when to go? And this is a bit of a graphic in terms of there's always a sort of a range of things depending on your bucket list, what you want to see. Some people are really focused on whales or really focused on penguin chicks, or they want to see massive ice flows, seals. So this is a bit of an overview of when to go and how. So there's never a bad time to go. You're always going to see something amazing. But there are times when, like, for example, if you really wanted to see a lot of whales tend to, particularly the humpback whales, tend to migrate down in January into February. If you want to see chicks on feet of the penguins, quite often that's more early season. So it really depends when you want to go, when you're available, and what you want to see. So there's a lot of factors, and I'm going to talk through some of those right now. So again, here's a close-up of South America, southern tip of South America, to the Antarctic Peninsula. And I've highlighted the South Shetland Islands there because that's quite often the first touch of Antarctica you get when you leave this amazing place, which is called Ushuaia. And Ushuaia and Punta Arenas in Chile are the two main ports where you depart from. So Ushuaia is probably the most popular. Amazing little southern rustic town in the mountains. And this is the jumping off point. So you normally fly into like Buenos Aires or Santiago, fly down to Ushuaia, and you quite often embark your ship here. So this is just an example of it's an itinerary of where you may go on the peninsula. So you leave Ushuaia, you're sort of 2 days at sea, and normally on the end of the second day, or into the third day, you touch the South Shetland Islands. So Whalers Bay there, that's Deception Island. So I'm going to talk about that shortly. That's a real highlight for a lot of people, or Livingston Island or King George Island. You'll normally make landfall at one of those islands first. Then you'll overnight head off down to the Gulash Strait, down into the peninsula itself. And that's when lots of action, lots of bang for buck in a really close environment happens. You've got things like Nico Harbour and Paradise Harbour, amazing places. I've got some photos of that to show you. Port Lockroy, Lemire Channel, and right down into way down south and past the Lemire Channel, sometimes down to Vernadsky Station or Peterman Island. There's some amazing spots down there, and that's about as far south as most ships go. But Bianca's going to talk about the Ponant Charcot ship, which can go a lot further. So some key highlights of the peninsula. Let's focus on that for a sec. Deception Island, that's a really amazing place. It's a volcano. You can sail into the caldera, and it's just an unworldly place. And it was also the place where Antarctica the continent itself was first spotted. Port Lockroy, southernmost post office in the world. Lemire Channel, it's called the Kodak Gap, amazing place where you've got mountains either side of you as you sail the ship through. And wildlife. So we all want to go there because of penguins, whales, birds, seals. The wildlife is phenomenal every day. Even when you're at sea, the seabirds are everywhere. So you're going to see wildlife every day. But connecting with the environment, whether that's hiking, sea kayaking, camping, or just generally exploring, people want to connect with the environment there because it is incredible. And I'm going to really talk about Paradise Harbour and Nico Harbour because there are some magic spots where you'll sort of just take in the breathtaking atmosphere of Antarctica. So Zodiacs, this is the main way you're going to get around off the ship. These things are really safe. They hold 10 to 12 people, and you hop off your ship, jump on a Zodiac, and they take you ashore and get you immersed in Antarctica. So I thought I'd just talk about this. This is Deception Island. So I'm standing there, and in the background, there's what's called Neptune's Bellows. And there's a little gap there with a little rock pillar. You actually sail through that gap into the active volcano, or so the volcanic area. It is a dormant volcano, but it still gives off steam, as I'll show you shortly. And once you're in that, and you can see the ship on the right there in the water, we take the Zodiacs, go ashore, land, and you can see the unworldly volcanic environment there with people walking around. And it obviously used to be, it's called Whalers Bay for a reason. It used to be a whaling station back in the day when they used to hunt whales, and there's the old whaling pots. So there's a lot of remnants and history in Antarctica. And Francesca's going to talk a little bit about the history down in the Ross Sea area. This is on some history on the peninsula side, and you can see we land here. That steam you can see is actually volcanic venting. So it's actually, it's very warm to walk along there. The water's actually quite warm in the bay itself. So even on a bad day, you get amazing experiences. This is us. We launched some Zodiacs, put them in the water, and you can see it's a whiteout day. It's snowing. What are we going to do? Put Zodiacs in the water, and lo and behold, we had this incredible encounter with humpback whales. And they swim right up to the Zodiacs. They're very graceful, very peaceful. They don't disturb the Zodiacs. They're just intrigued. You can see the blowhole there, and you get up really close with whales. And this is a whale just swimming past. You can see its fin there. So incredible interactions when you're down on the peninsula itself. So this is just a bit of a close-up highlight. Once you get right down into the peninsula, Port Lockroy there that's highlighted, that's a must-see. Almirante Brown with Argentina there, that's an Argentinian base. Quite often that's the first touch of the actual continent for people. So that's a really key highlight. And then Lemire Channel's highlighted. If it's not too ice choked, which it can be, if it's not too ice choked, you may get the chance to go down the Lemire Channel, and Peterman Island's right at the bottom. That can be quite constrained by ice. So some ships obviously can't get down there, but it just depends on the time of the year. November may be tricky, December, but by the time you get into sort of January, February, it's quite possible to get down that far south. So these guys, these are Gentoo penguins, and you can see the amazing little chicks there. So they tend to have 1 or 2 chicks. These are the most predominant penguins you'll see on the peninsula itself, and they are, in most places you'll land. So here's a good example. This is the flagpole at Port Lockroy. So this is a British base, and there's Gentoo penguins all over the base. This is the actual post office itself. So you can actually go and post postcards or letters from this base, and they get sent wherever you want to send them in the world, stamped with Antarctica. So it's an incredible chance to send some Antarctic postage, if you like. And this is just out the back. So this is the backdrop to Port Lockroy. And you can see when you're not in the post office, you just walk outside, there's Gentoo penguins everywhere. And the photography options are just incredible. Another thing that's quite popular is sea kayaking. So people get the chance, depending on what trip you're on, to go sea kayaking. It's not for everyone, but the chance to sea kayak in Antarctica is pretty special. It's actually quite calm down on the peninsula. Obviously, the Drake Passage itself can be a bit rough, although it's called the Drake Lake at times because it can be incredibly calm. People think it's always rough. It can be, but it can also be incredibly calm. But once you get down onto the peninsula, generally, you'll have some bad weather, but it tends to be, it's quite sheltered. So you tend to be able to hike and kayak quite easily. And Zodiac cruising. This is a key part of it. Most days when you're down on the peninsula, you're going to Zodiac cruise, and that just gets you up close with wildlife, with just the nature around you, with the landscapes. So take a good camera. That's my suggestion. This is the start of the Lemire Channel. So basically you can see the nose of the ship. It's heading towards the gap there that you can't quite see down the gap. You sail down in between these two mountain ranges, and again, called the Kodak Gap for that reason. It's just so photographic as you get into there. And right at the bottom of the Lemire Channel, this is Peterman Island. So interestingly, and Bianca's going to talk about Charcot. Charcot actually wintered his ship over in this location, and there's a little bay in there where the hut is, and carved into the rock is Charcot on the rock itself. And you can see quite hard to get to. We're driving the Zodiacs here through some pretty rough ice just to get back to the ship. And this is about the limits of how you could get ashore. When it gets more ice choked than this, you're not going to be going ashore. But again, depends on the season and depends on the time of the year. So let's just talk wildlife for a sec. Again, a huge range, but I'm just going to quickly flick through some of the highlights. This is a leopard seal. Leopard seals are a predator. They hunt penguins. You'll see these amazing animals down there. They look really prehistoric, and I thought I'd just put this photo in for scale. The females of leopard seals are larger than the males. This is a female leopard seal, and you can see the size of it compared to my colleague here, who's not a little guy himself, but the leopard seal completely overwhelms his size. They're huge animals. Weddell seals. So you tend to see these more further south. You see them a lot in the Ross Sea. They tend to spend more time on ice floes than the other seals. They tend to be much further south, as opposed to these seals, which are the crab eaters. These are the most prevalent seal in Antarctica. You'll see these everywhere, a lot on the peninsula, but crab eaters are very prevalent along the peninsula itself. Adelie penguins. If you've seen Happy Feet, these guys are the characters. These are amazing penguins. They're just great to interact with and watch. And just standing on the edge of an ice floe, watching them come out of the water is pretty special. And when you're down near Almirante Brown, actually, on the peninsula, these blue-eyed cormorants, they all nest near that station. So they're, you can see, very photographic bird to witness down there. So I'm just skimming through a whole bunch of highlights, but some other highlights that you might partake in, again, not for everyone, but camping. You get a chance maybe to camp in Antarctica. To be honest, you won't do a lot of sleeping. 24-hour sunlight, you're probably not going to sleep that well. It's quite noisy down there. You've got ice floes moving, you've got wildlife, but the chance to sleep in Antarctica is very special for a lot of people. And I can tell you, it's pretty cold in the water, but you can see the person jumping off the ice floe here. Full harness on in case you freeze up, but the chance to go for a polar plunge is something a lot of people want to take up until they actually enter the water, and you can certainly see this person's like, I'm not sure I made the right move here. So yeah, it's a really special chance to say I've swum in Antarctica. So most people sort of jump at this chance. Okay, so this is Nico Harbour. So as I said, Nico Harbour, just you hike up these points, we'll land the Zodiac, you hike up to a high point. There's not a lot of wildlife up here. This is about landscapes and scenery and just taking in the breathtaking views. So this is Almirante Brown, just around the corner. So you can see the Argentinian station huts there. You actually hike up to that high point just behind the huts there to get a view. And this is all just landing the Zodiacs, landing the people. And you can see pretty spectacular with the glaciers in the background. So we don't have long, so I'm going to run through a few other things. South Georgia. Now, a lot of trips also run via Falkland, South Georgia to the peninsula. That's also an option. I will say South Georgia is definitely further away. You've got a little bit more sea time. South Georgia, though, is known as the Galapagos of the South. So for some people, that's a priority. It's a longer trip, it's more sea time, but you do get to see thousands of penguins. So these are king penguins, nesting king penguins in South Georgia, and the little brown fuzzy things there are the chicks, and I'll have a close-up of one of those shortly. So they're not quite the largest penguin in Antarctica. The largest penguin is the emperor penguin, but the emperor penguins are just a beautiful color palette. They're very friendly. You stand still, they'll come up and observe you because they have no land predators. So you'll see them just walking around at peace if you just stand still and let them come to you. And then you get to see this type of interaction. This is obviously an adult feeding a chick. So the adults go out to sea, get the food and bring it back and basically feed the chicks that way until they're large enough to molt and go to sea themselves. And I love these guys. These are elephant seal. Basically, these are called weaners. These are the baby elephant seals. They are full of rolls of fat, blubber, and then they cuddle a lot when they're young, but then they grow up and then they do this. So these are two male elephant seals. They fight for control of areas of the beach, and you can see the huge teeth on them and the gnaw marks all down the neck of the elephant seal there. Incredible, but you don't want to get near these. These are a couple of ton each, these animals, and they control their part of the beach, so we give them a lot of space when we land in South Georgia. And macaroni penguins. One of the only places you'll see macaroni penguins down in South Georgia, and there's some really great spots where they all nest as well. So they're quite characters, a bit like the Adelies. So to finish with, I thought I'd just touch on some journeys. So I've done over 40 trips to Antarctica, and 8 of my trips have been these journeys, these long journeys. And they're not for everyone. There's a lot of sea time. This might be a 35-day trip, and you've got 6 days from Ross Sea back to Hobart, Tasmania there. But why you do a journey is because they're truly monumental. They're going from Falklands, Stanley and the Falklands through to Hobart is an incredible chance to go on a long journey, semicirc, navigate Antarctica, and then you can see you're touching the Antarctic Peninsula, you're going all along the Phantom Coast into the Ross Sea itself, go to McMurdo, you'll go to the historic huts, and then you come out and you quite often go via Macquarie Island, and then you land back in Australia. And there's multiple trips like this where you may end up back in New Zealand, or you may end up in Perth. There's different options that different companies do at different times of the year. And I'll let Bianca talk a little bit more about a longer journey with the Ponant Charcot ship. So again, a little bit more sea time. Some of the roughest conditions I've had in the ocean have been that Southern Ocean. But again, it's only for a few days, and sometimes it can be calm, sometimes it can be rough, but the ships are stabilized now. So they're a lot better than this ship that I'm on here, which tended to roll a lot. The ships now are really stabilized and a lot safer in terms of getting thrown about in the ship. But you do have some significant sea time, but that's also, for a lot of people, part of the amazing journey that you're on. Also, when you get on things like an icebreaker, you get to break ice. So you get to go in these incredible locations that no other ship can get to, and partake by pushing into the ice. And the one thing that these type of trips will do is they'll get you to places that really very few people ever get to, and very few people get to experience. And one of those is emperor penguins, because the emperor penguin is the only penguin that actually nests on the ice itself. And you can see the chicks here. So the journey trips, the icebreaker trips will get you into these type of locations. And again, you just stand still there, and these penguins will come up to you because they don't have land predators. So they're more fascinated with you than you are of them. They love coming up and just discovering what you're all about. Some of the ships require helicopters to do this. So just being aware, there may be helicopters on the ship, there may not, but that's also a way you can access these locations. And if you've got helicopters, you can go and land on the ice shelf itself. Again, not much to see, just to experience having been on the ice shelf. But I would say probably the predominant thing to do, the most impactful thing, is being able to park the ship in the ice, on the sea ice floe itself, put the gangway down and go and walk on the ice. And then again, the wildlife just comes up to you. So this is Scott Base in the Ross Sea. I was lucky enough, my first time to Antarctica, I was a field training instructor at Scott Base. So I worked for the government base down there. McMurdo Station's just over the hill. So you can see the Ross ice shelf in the background there, where it meets land, Scott Base is on, and meets sea ice. So it's sort of a confluence there. So not far from Scott Base. This is Cape Royds, and I'll let Francesca talk about this, but this is Shackleton's hut, where these people are standing just below that. And the reason I put this photo in is scale. That's the Transantarctic Mountains in the background, Royal Society, actually, the closer ones. And that's about 80 to 90 kilometers away. So that's just to give you an idea of sheer scale in Antarctica. This is Shackleton's hut. I won't touch much on that, but you may get to see the historic huts down there. And this is inside Bolshevik's hut. So again, you go into these huts and they are eerie. The hairs on your arms, goosebumps. You can feel almost like how the explorers left these huts 100 years ago. And again, I was really lucky enough, and Francesca will talk about this, Shackleton's whiskey. I was lucky enough to be down there when they actually pulled the whiskey out from under the hut. And there's a whole story around that if you haven't discovered that. And I'm going to let somebody else talk about that shortly. And this is Scott's hut at Cape Evans. The reason I put this photo in is I was lucky enough to, that mountain in the background is Mount Erebus. And to give you an idea of scale, the hut there is at sea level. That mountain is just under 4 kilometers high. So it gives you an idea of sheer scale. And I was lucky enough when I worked down there to climb Mount Erebus. And it's an active volcano, the world's southernmost active volcano. And you can see where I'm kneeling here. You look into the caldera and it's bubbling hot magma down in there. So an amazing experience that I had when I worked down there. And just to finish with, I thought I'd touch on a great experience we had on a journey trip. You never know what's going to happen. And we got some photos from the British Antarctic Survey that said there was this emperor penguin colony in the Shackleton ice shelf. And no one had ever seen this colony, and it had only been seen on satellite imagery. And we had helicopters on this exploratory ship I was on, and they said, look, when you're down there, and this is a long way from anywhere, and they said, when you're down there, can you see if you can find this colony? We flew around for about 2 hours and we were almost done. And I don't think you can see it very well in that picture, but if you look at the ice shelf there, there's a really jagged piece sticking out sort of center of the image. Just above that, there's actually some little black dots. That was some emperor penguins we saw, and we were just about done. Spotted these emperor penguins and went, aha, there's got to be a colony around here somewhere. So we put down and we hiked about 3 miles, it's about 5 kilometers, and we followed some tracks, and then we found the colony in this area. It was like something out of Happy Feet, if you've seen that. You walk into this area, look in, and there's just hundreds and hundreds of emperor penguins in there. And you just park up and they were just fascinated. They just come walking on by, wander on by with their chicks, which I thought were absolutely amazing. And yeah, just an incredible experience that we documented and that got published where that colony is. So I thought I'd finish with my last image. One of my favorite images of emperor penguin chicks. They're full of character, and I just thought I'd finish with this image. But look, welcome to Antarctica, discovering it, and I'm going to let Bianca now talk about how to get down there.
Thanks, Aaron. Bianca, we'll get you to jump in and start sharing your screen now. And for the purposes of the people joining in on this webinar, as we mentioned at the start, Bianca is the New Zealand Business Development Manager for Ponant Cruises. She's a passionate photographer and explorer herself, having completed 2 expeditions to the southernmost part of the world. And what she's going to be taking us through today is what to expect when traveling with a luxury polar expedition company like Ponant.
Hi everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in. It was great to hear from Aaron about what to expect down in Antarctica. As the guys have mentioned, I've been down there twice now. I'm very fortunate to have over 20 expeditions under my belt. Most have been either in the polar regions or some tropical expeditions too, but Antarctica definitely has to be my favorite. I am the business development manager for a company called Ponant. So I thought today I'd introduce you to the company Ponant and a little bit about our history and our brand and our philosophy before we then explore our newest vessel, a really exciting ship called Le Commandant Charcot. And then I'll touch on a few of the itineraries and ways to get you down there. So the idea for Ponant was conceived by 2 French naval officers, and that was over 30 years ago now. Found in our company's DNA is a passion for adventure and exploration that's really stood the test of time and seen Penant's presence elevated to a global stage as a pioneer of boutique and also purposeful expedition travel experiences. Over the past 30 years, we have become renowned as the world leader in luxury expeditions. Our legacy started back in 1988 with one 3-masted vessel, right through to 13 luxury ships today. We have an exceptional fleet that explores all corners of the globe, from the North Pole right down to the Southern Oceans, all 7 continents. These are purpose-built small ships taking a maximum of only 330, but very rarely would they travel with more than 150 or 200 in the Antarctic regions. And they all share a green ship certification, which is recognition of paying the utmost of respects to the environment. And that brings me to the vessel today that I want to speak about in particular. So let me introduce to you Le Commandant Charcot. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, Charcot for short. She is the world's first and only luxury icebreaker. So Charcot's story is a story of people, vision, design, passion, and a respect for the environment. It's a story of the scientific and maritime exploration of the poles. Incredible synergy between talented people who all have a passion for the sea and a taste for a challenge too. So she was a vision that was 6 years in the making. She's one of the most technologically advanced vessels in the world today. So in just 12 short months since her inception last year, this vessel's proven its superiority with a few company firsts, but also multiple world firsts. She was awarded Expedition Ship of the Year. She was the first French flagship to make it to the North Pole, and also the first one to do so by battery power, before then making her way to the Antarctic. She spent around 4 hours reversing through the ice to then allow the famous Sir David Attenborough to make their way through to the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica, where the British Antarctic Survey team are doing research into climate change and the impact on the Thwaites Glacier. So this took Charcot about 4 hours, and it's usually a trip that would take the researchers over 4 days. And in February this year, she arrived at the most southerly maritime point ever reached in history, at 78 degrees and a half south in the Bay of Wales in the Ross Sea, and set a new world record at the time. She has the ability to navigate through up to 15 feet of ice. She's actually a hybrid electric vessel, so powered by liquefied natural gas and battery power. So therefore, close to zero emissions and zero noise pollution. I kind of equate her to like the Tesla of the cruise industry, if you will. I guess if your Tesla had free-flowing Veuve Clicquot champagne and 2 pools. But the end product is a low-impact exploration, so ensuring that the natural world isn't disturbed, and it allows us to silently and carefully observe. We decided to utilize this ship's ability to get to these remote regions for the greater good and to further climate research and our understanding of the poles. She's equipped with a wet and dry laboratory, computer rooms to collate data, as well as then cabins that are dedicated to scientists and researchers. This is open to scientific organizations around the world, free of charge. And the only catch is that they're there then to undertake a citizen science program with our guests. So whereby our passengers then contribute to this research, assisting with testing and data collection, adding a really practical and hands-on element to our Antarctic expeditions. She's also then been the conduit for multinational polar rescue exercises too, which is something that we're really proud of to contribute to. So despite her hearty exterior and capabilities, there's elements of luxury have been incorporated, I guess, for the travelers of today. So you can really feel like an explorer, but live like a king. The design of Le Commandant Charcot reflects one overarching principle, and that's to invite the polar environment in. So the result is some incredible cozy spaces that are then open to the outside world and flooded with natural light. Following the Penant signature, there's many beautiful spaces to relax and chat to new friends and traveling companions, as well as the expedition team throughout the 3 lounges on board. And there's also the choice of 2 restaurants, perhaps my favorite of which is called Nuna. So this is the first Alain Ducasse restaurant at sea. For anyone who doesn't know him, Alain Ducasse has over 19 Michelin stars across his 36 global restaurants. Back in 2015, he was actually the first chef to send his cuisine to space. So the astronauts on the International Space Station dined on Alain Ducasse stunning delicacies, and now you too can enjoy Alain Ducasse dining right in the heart of Antarctica. It's quite incredible. There's an on-deck experience like no other. We have a natural hot spring, it's inspired by the natural hot springs of Iceland, and we call it the Blue Lagoon. So true to the low consumption philosophy that we have, this is actually heated by energy drawn from the ship's wastewater. So a really incredible way to view the polar landscapes from spaces like this. And of course, you have a comfy, contemporary, functional stateroom to return to after a day's exploring. And each one has a private balcony, so an all-important factor when on expedition. The onboard facilities are amazing, but of course, when we're traveling in the regions like Antarctica, our aim is to get you off the ship as much as possible. So the kayaking, zodiac touring, snowshoeing, hiking, and more that Aaron spoke about briefly before is all included. And we offer completely flexible itineraries so that we can get you off the ship as much as possible. This may mean a morning, an afternoon, and even an evening activity or event ashore. So just because we are luxury, it doesn't mean that we lack a sense of adventure. With those flexible itineraries comes the ability to enjoy amazing surprise encounters. As Aaron mentioned, the wildlife, including the 50,000 humpback whales that migrate to these waters over summer each year, is just truly magical and makes for a unique part of the Antarctic. And of course, the ability to step back in time as well at these historic huts too. So there are close to 15 different options for itineraries traveling to the Antarctic, specifically on Le Commandant Charcot, this new vessel. And then we also have 3 of our sister ships that explore the Antarctic every year and have been doing so for a long time, predominantly leaving from Ushuaia. And then we have another sister ship, Le Soleil, who will be exploring the Ross Sea region and the New Zealand subantarctic islands from Dunedin. But I thought today I'd highlight the Le Commandant Charcot adventures that are truly spectacular and unique, starting with the emperor penguins of the Weddell Sea. So an incredible exploration of that eastern side of the Antarctic Peninsula into the Weddell Seas and into the pack ice of that side of the peninsula that's seldom visited quite that far south. And of course, in search of the elusive emperor penguins. Then in the footsteps of Shackleton and the Endurance, another fantastic opportunity to explore the tip of the peninsula out to South Georgia and to learn and discover some of the history and the historic explorations that I'm sure Francesca will touch on a little bit as well. And then our most comprehensive journey. If you're only going to tick Antarctica off once, you know, it is that bucket list item, then be bold. We have a journey like this, so a half circumnavigation, departing from Lyttelton right through to Ushuaia. So taking in the best of Charcot, our namesake's island. We have the Bellinghausen Sea, Amundsen Sea, and the Ross Sea, as well as a stop in Macquarie Island over 26 days. So it is a long expedition, but is not to be missed. It's an incredible opportunity to visit the seldom visited areas of the Phantom Coastline. I'll leave it there. So thank you so much for having us, and please do speak to Aaron and the team at exploreGO about the whole variety of options that there are for Ponant experiences in Antarctica.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bianca. That was amazing. And it looks like there's such a variety of incredible trips, both from Ushuaia and also the likes of Dunedin as well for our Kiwi and Australian travellers. And we'll circle back at the end with a bit of a Q&A where we'll delve more into some of those aspects. But now we'll jump over to Francesca, and for our guests, a bit of a recap. Francesca is the Chief Operations Officer at the Antarctic Heritage Trust. And the Antarctic Heritage Trust is a New Zealand-based charity with the vision of inspiring explorers. And they're on a mission to conserve, share, and encourage the spirit of exploration to the incredible bases that our Antarctic explorers can operate from. So, Francesca, over to you.
Sir Innes Shackleton said, "It is in our nature to explore, to reach out into the unknown." Standing here in this ice cave in the Erebus Glacier tongue in Antarctica, I certainly felt like I was embodying that same spirit of exploration. Quite simply, it was one of the best moments of my life. It was in 2019, and I was incredibly lucky to be traveling with the Antarctic Heritage Trust conservation team to spend some time over their summer program at Ross Island as they conserve this remarkable legacy that the Trust cares for of the early polar explorers' historic expedition bases. I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of Antarctic Heritage Trust to share with you a little more about our mission to conserve, share, and encourage the spirit of exploration. As Steve mentioned, we are a New Zealand-based charity here in Christchurch, but we have a very global outlook because we care for, on behalf of the international community, a remarkable legacy that goes back to these 4 polar explorers. Now, 3 of those names will look pretty familiar to you, I imagine. Sir Innes Shackleton, Robert Falcon Scott, Sir Edmund Hillary. But perhaps that first name might be one that you haven't heard of before, and that is the Norwegian Carsten Borchgrevink. And he would set up the first expedition base on the Antarctic continent, proving that humans could survive that dark and cold Antarctic winter. We care for their legacy over 100 years later in the case of a number of those explorers. And this is a physical legacy of 5 expedition bases. You can clearly see that 4 of those are well over 100 years old, and then a slightly more modern looking building on the bottom right there, which is of course Sir Edmund Hillary's hut, or what we would refer to as the first scientific facility that New Zealand built in Antarctica. These sites are of significant global value. Antarctica is in fact the only continent on Earth where humans' first dwellings still stand. And that gives us this remarkable cultural heritage that the Trust is proud to care for on behalf of the world. These sites, we often refer to them as the birthplace of science in Antarctica. There was incredible science undertaken by the early polar explorers. Some of that science, in fact, continues today, particularly in relation to climate and the climate scientists that work in Antarctica trying to understand more about this climate change puzzle. Each of these sites, we are pleased to say, has the highest level of protection available under the Antarctic Treaty System. We care for these sites under what we call the Ross Sea Heritage Restoration Project. And this is the world's longest running and largest cold climate heritage conservation work. Over the last 20 years that we've been running this project, we have conserved 3 of the heroic era buildings at Ross Island, so Scott's 2 huts and Shackleton's only Antarctic base, as well as Sir Ed Hillary's hut, which is at New Zealand's Scott base. And along the way, we have conserved more than 20,000 items that have been left behind. I like to say, you name it, they took it. Food, clothing, scientific equipment, expedition equipment, whiskey, as Aaron mentioned, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. So much of it has been left behind. So we have a huge collection of artifacts that really make these places so special. They become very much like living museums. And over the last 20 years, we've had more than 80 heritage and conservation professionals come to Antarctica and work with us. And they've come from about 15 different nationalities. So it truly is an international collaboration. And we've raised around $25 million to undertake the initial conservation in order to make the huts themselves weatherproof and sound and safe for the artifact collections that are now conserved there. And we continue to raise money for our mission so that we can look after these sites well into the future. They are much like our own homes. There is a constant monitoring and maintenance that happens. And of course, unlike our own homes, they are in the world's most extreme environment. So in terms of location, as mentioned, we're working down in the Ross Sea region of Antarctica, and particularly on Ross Island, where 4 of these historic bases currently are. And you can see them here on this map. But about 800 kilometres further north is a very wild and hostile place called Cape Adare. And this is where the Norwegian Carsten Borchgrevink landed and built this first expedition base. This is Ridley Beach here at Cape Adare, a very small triangular piece of land, battered by the sea ice on one side, the Kiribatic winds coming over the mountains on the other, a very cold, windy and hostile place to build that first expedition base. And you can see it here with the hut built, and you might be wondering why there's a Union Jack flying there, and that's because despite being led by a Norwegian, it was in fact funded by a wealthy British businessman. So it was named the British Southern Cross Expedition, and you can see the Southern Cross ship moored in the background there. There were 10 men who wintered over and undertook the first scientific and exploration on the environment, and they were from a number of different nationalities. The stories associated with the site alone are quite mind-blowing. This is the hut today, and it is the only example left of humanity's first dwelling on any continent. So culturally, from a heritage point of view, it is very significant, and we're very pleased to be starting to undertake the conservation work at this site. This site has really interesting characteristics. For example, it is home to the world's largest Adelie penguin colony. Over 1 million penguins actually live here and nest and have their chicks. And looking out from the ridge here, all of those little black dots in this photograph are in fact penguins. I've not had the opportunity to visit the site, but the teams tell me when you first visit, the overwhelming sound of 1 million penguins and the penguin poo, or the guano, is quite overwhelming in terms of smells. It's also an incredibly windy place, and it's not unusual for the wind to gust up to 150 kilometres per hour. You might notice here on the beach that it's rocky and gravelly, and so that all gets whipped up in the wind. So it's from a health and safety point of view for our teams living and working here, sometimes for weeks at a time, it does take quite a lot of extra precautions for us to safely be at this site. A few years ago, we were able to remove a number of artefacts from the site and bring them back to a specialist lab at Canterbury Museum here in Christchurch to undertake their conservation, as it wasn't suitable to do that in situ. You may have heard the story of what I think might be the world's most famous fruitcake. We found their perfectly preserved Huntley and Palmer's rich fruitcake. In fact, the team, when they were conserving it, there was a rip in the wrapper. You can actually see the fruitcake here, frozen in time for over 105 years. The team actually said it smelled like it was edible, like you could cut a slice and have it with a hot cup of tea or maybe a wee dram of whiskey. Obviously, we don't taste our artifacts, so that would be quite unethical, but really amazing to find food like this that's been preserved for so many years after the men have left that expedition. So now coming down the coast back to Ross Island and coming forward to 1901, Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery ship left the port of Lyttelton here in Canterbury and sailed down to Ross Island, where at Hut Point he built his first expedition base, a very simple wooden looking building. Here's an historic photo of it. You can see the ship moored in the background. And it was at a place called Hut Point, a little thin peninsula that heads out from the mainland on Ross Island. This was a really significant expedition in terms of continuing on the theme of science. Here, the men have gone up in a hot air balloon to take aerial photographs of the landscape and to understand the environment more. This is science that would be built on over the expeditions to come. You can see here the hut, a kind of lonely looking place in some ways on the end of this peninsula, incredibly cold, battered by the winds that pour in. And if you come back towards the land, if you can imagine, that is where today the American McMurdo station is, a large sort of sprawling American town almost. So in real stark contrast to the simple wooden hut that Scott and his expedition were to be based at. It is a very significant piece of polar history because so many of the expeditions that came after the 1901 Discovery expedition used this hut, and particularly for shelter, and for some of them it saved their lives. We've undertaken extensive heritage conservation work here, including a lot of heritage carpentry in order to make this site weathertight so that we don't have snow ingress, that we're able to monitor and manage things like the relative humidity. And there's about 500 artifacts in this hut, all sorts of really fascinating things that have been placed there by different expeditions over the years. Now, moving forward in time, in 1907, Sir Ernest Shackleton, again, sailing from the port of Littleton on the Nimrod ship, headed down to set up his only Antarctic base. Now, Shackleton had actually been on Scott's Discovery expedition, but had been invalided home partway through. So he was really keen to get back and launch his own expedition. And this is a really significant hut. There were a number of firsts that happened for this expedition, including the furthest south record at the time, the first ascent of Mount Erebus, and a number of other important discoveries. This is probably too where so many of those extraordinary stories of Sir Ernest Shackleton's leadership started. I don't have time to share them all with you this morning, but they really are a terrific read if you're interested in polar history. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, Mount Erebus does sort of loom in the background of both this hut and Scott's second hut, which we'll show you in a moment. So it's incredibly prominent to really stand there and to look at this huge active volcano and to think about those men who left their friends and their family, sailed to the ends of the earth in pursuit of science and exploration on behalf of humankind. And we are still inspired by their many incredible stories well over 100 years later. This is the inside of Shackleton's hut. Again, the conservation work has been undertaken by us. You can see the Mrs. Sam's stove there, and it always makes me think about the stories of how the men baked fresh bread, and they describe the hut as being a very cosy and homely place to be. There's around 6,500 artifacts left behind. You can see on the shelves at the back of the image there, lots of food, tinned food, which they brought plenty of, but they did try to live off their fresh meat supplies for as long as they could. And of course, I can't mention Shackleton's hut without sharing perhaps our most famous find, and that was bottles of whiskey and brandy underneath Shackleton's hut. And when we excavated those, we were able to, under a special permit from the New Zealand government, actually take them up to Scotland and to work with White and Mackay, the modern day distillery. And this man here, Richard Patterson, also known as the Nose, a master whiskey blender, to recreate an exact replica of this whiskey, which then the trust was able to benefit from when it was actually sold around the world. We do receive a little bit of money for every bottle that is sold. We are a charity, and so we do need to fundraise 100% of the money that goes into our programs. And so a lot of people do like to buy the whiskey, and there's 3 different editions of it now, and this is the latest edition here. And it's a wonderful way to support the trust. We like to say, drink whiskey and help save Antarctica. So coming back to Robert Falcon Scott, he was really keen to return to the Antarctic. And of course, part of that was to see if he could be the first to lead a party to the geographic South Pole. If you know your polar history, you'll know that Roald Amundsen was there around the same time, and of course did reach the pole some time ahead of Scott and his polar party. But they established their second expedition base at Cape Evans, often referred to as the Terra Nova Hut. It's a really significant site for a number of reasons, but particularly because, of course, Scott and his polar party never did return here, having perished, sadly, on their return from the South Pole. This is an image from Midwinter's Day, when they had their sort of midwinter Christmas meal. And you might even notice with the number of flags hanging up there, there's even a Kiwi flag, a New Zealand flag, to represent those Kiwis that were on this expedition. Falcon Scott sitting at the top of the table. And today you can see that very same spot with the wardroom table here, over 11,500 artifacts that have in fact been conserved as part of this site. It was a really challenging project for our team to undertake the conservation work here and to be able to move those artifacts either away from the hut or up into the rafters, for example, as they were able to lift the 4 floorboards and take out of many, many thousands of kilos of ice that were underneath the hut that needed to be removed. Truly remarkable stories. So David Attenborough, when he visited these sites, he talked about them being a time warp without parallel. And I absolutely agree with that. When I walked into Captain Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova hut, you absolutely feel those stories hang heavy in the air. It gives you pause for thought about what these men risked. Some of them didn't return, but what they actually achieved on behalf of humankind was truly remarkable. I was really grateful when I was there to actually record a podcast with our conservation experts, talking about the work that they did in the sites. So what is conservation? How do you conserve a hut in the Antarctic region when there's no hardware store down the road that you can pop to if you've forgotten something? How do you plan and prepare for that? And what are some of the iconic stories associated with each of the spaces in this hut? And if you're interested in hearing my podcast, that's on all of the usual platforms as well as on our website, called Frozen in Time, Scott's Antarctic Legacy. It's a wonderful way to immerse yourself and to feel as though you have travelled to the hut, hopefully ahead of your actual journey. Now, jumping forward a few decades, the British explorer Vivian Fuchs was keen to recreate Shackleton's crossing. As many of you will know, Shackleton had a failed trans-Antarctic crossing with the Endurance expedition back from 1914. So Fuchs was keen to actually undertake and complete this crossing, sort of in honour of with homage to Shackleton. Sir Edmund Hillary was asked to lead a team of 23 New Zealanders as part of the party to lay the food and fuel depots for the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition. And as part of that, New Zealand set up its first scientific facility at Scott Base to support that expedition, and also a large science project that was being undertaken by 67 different countries around the world called the International Geophysical Year. So there was very much an ongoing commitment in the 1950s and 60s to more exploration of the Antarctic continent, including mapping unmapped areas, but also this ongoing science, which is really terrific to think about, that science that was continued from over 50 years before this time and continues to go on today with many different national programs in Antarctica supporting science. We conserved this hut that we often call the Trans-Antarctic Expedition Hut, or Sir Edmund Hillary's hut, in time for Scott Base's 60th anniversary in 2017. It's quite a different space to the heroic era huts. You can see that it has electricity, and it certainly looks a lot more warm and cozy. And I would attest to that, having spent quite a bit of time here. There's around 600 different artifacts that have been conserved as part of this hut as well. And this is it here at Scott Base, New Zealand's contemporary station, which is actually undergoing a rebuild at the moment. It's wonderful to know that because this hut has historic monument status and is protected under the Antarctic Treaty System, that it will remain here in situ as a historic part of the base. And I think its retro colours really give you a sense of the unique place that it holds in New Zealand's Antarctic history. Now, that's a little bit of a fast and furious summary of some of the history and these remarkable sites that we care for in Antarctica. But at Antarctic Heritage Trust, we know that it is going to be the next generation that actually advocate and protect these huts, this remarkable legacy into the future. And so we are committed to inspiring the next generation with the same spirit of exploration that these early polar explorers had, so that they might understand this Antarctic legacy that we care for, that they will value it, and in the future be motivated to protect it. So we have a large Inspiring Explorers youth program that runs from 11 years of age right through to 30 years of age. We take young people 18 to 30 on expeditions to the world's polar regions, challenging them to step out of their comfort zones, to build their explorer mindsets, and upon their return, go back into their communities, deliver an outreach program, and inspire others to explore. Part of our team is actually away at the moment attempting a 1,000-kilometre ski traverse to the South Pole. The Kiwi-Norwegian team of young people, and it's in honour of Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer's 150th birthday. It's very exciting. They're only 6 days in, and we're hoping that by the end of this year that they will have reached the South Pole safely. We also have a really large Inspiring Explorers education program. So we take our public engagement officers out into schools and community venues all around New Zealand, and we showcase the unique digital resources that we have built to bring Antarctica to the world. One of those is a fully immersive virtual reality experience of Sir Edmund Hillary's Antarctic hut. You put on the headset like pictured here, and you are transported to Antarctica virtually. You can walk through and explore the 5 spaces of this hut, hear more about the exploration and science that the team are undertaking, and hopefully be inspired to do more about New Zealand and the world's connection to Antarctica and why it is so important to the world today. We also have a wonderful free augmented reality app that has a couple of different experiences on it, including the ability to bring artifacts like the famous fruitcake that I mentioned earlier into your own environment using augmented reality. We're really committed to being able to share these stories because most people will not have the opportunity to visit. And if you are considering visiting this place, it is one of the most wonderful things that you will ever do. It's a privilege to visit, to be in awe of these landscapes and the human history. It's very hard not to come back and feel that you have changed as a person. If you are interested in following along on our social media, we're on all the usual platforms at Antarctic Heritage, and we also have a fantastic website at nzaht.org that has plenty of amazing resources from our virtual reality through to short films, podcasts, videos, and of course, fantastic historic information about these early explorers and what it was that they achieved. And we are so proud to be the agency that cares for this legacy on behalf of the world.
Thanks, Francesca. It's so truly inspiring to learn some of the early stories from the initial Antarctic explorers, and also some of the initiatives that the Antarctic Heritage Trust is doing to preserve that legacy for our future generations. So thank you so much for sharing your insights there. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump into a bit of a panel discussion, and there's a couple of questions that came up top of mind when you guys were going through your presentations that I think will be really valuable for our viewers to know. And so what I'll do is I'll just quickly change up the view. And once again, if you can all please unmute yourselves and we'll kick off. So Aaron, I'm actually going to direct the first question your way. And during your presentation, you touched on the times of year that people should go. And I assume also that, you know, you've done over 41 expeditions to the polar region, each for different things and at different times of year, no doubt. So for a first-time visitor to Antarctica, that may potentially also be doing a shorter trip, is there a particular time of year that you'd recommend for a first-time visitor as opposed to a repeat visitor?
I mean, in some ways, the polar regions and Antarctica, the period to go is reasonably short, but I would say, you know, any time between November and February, and also including, you can go in March, you can go in October. But honestly, you are going to, I think Francesca just summed it up when you just said you're going to come back changed. It's an amazing place. It really, truly is. And I've been there a lot. And I can't. You get a thing called the polar disease, and what that is you just get addicted to Antarctica, and people say, oh, I'll go there once and I'll tick that box. I can tell you it is just the most life-changing place, and it's incredible, and you will go there and go, oh my goodness, I want to go back. That was amazing. So I would just say, honestly, it doesn't really matter when you go. Whenever the ships offer sailings down there, as Bianca showed with some of the itineraries, you're not going to be disappointed. You will have an incredible experience at any time. I mean, I will say probably, you know, obviously when most people have holidays, December and January are busy. You know, there's a lot of people that go down there, but for good reason. You know, it's probably the warmer period of the time. It's definitely colder in November. It's getting cold again in March. But again, we've got the tools to deal with that. We've got more clothes to put on. You know, you go at different times of the year, you're going to see different things. So I know what you're asking, Seb, but from my perspective, you're never going to be disappointed when you go, because you don't know, the weather can be bad in November and January. It can be great in November and January. So I just, as long as there's a sailing and you've got the itinerary you want and it's ticking what you want, I would just say go, like go sooner than later.
Nice. And Bianca, I guess, in terms of the specific sailing times, when's your season run from, and does that differ between your different vessels?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we do visit Antarctica both from New Zealand as well as then out of Ushuaia and out of South America. Our adventures out of South America do have a longer season. We've just recently, earlier this month, we've started sailing there. So we'll have 3 sister ships as well as Charcot down there for the entirety of the season, which runs from essentially the start of November right through to the end of March. Then for the New Zealand season, we do have a smaller window of opportunity, which is throughout January and February that we do go down there. As the guys have said, that sort of December, January period is really popular. But I can also attest to the fact, just go as soon as you can. Basically, go while you have your mobility, go while you've got the inspiration and you've got the ability to go a second time if you want. Because I absolutely agree, it's addictive. It is the most truly inspirational place on this planet. So go as soon as you can, and any time of year you won't be disappointed.
Nice, that's awesome. And I guess that's a good segue, Bianca, in terms of people with that need a little bit of additional accessibility support, you know, if they've got mental or physical challenges. And Aaron, you also touched on the fact that, you know, your main transport from the ships to the land is Zodiacs. Can you guys both tell us a little bit about whether an expedition like this is appropriate for people that do need a bit more accessibility assistance? And I guess, Bianca, how you guys help accommodate and support that?
Yeah, absolutely. So across all of our ships, we do have specialized staterooms that are catered to people with less ability. These are fully wheelchair accessible. I actually have a story to share on this. When I was on Antarctic expedition, we had a 92-year-old lady join us who was in the wheelchair. And I remember speaking to her, and, you know, she was honestly just happy to be on board the ship. You're able to see so much from the comfort of your stateroom, from the outside decks. And she was honestly, I think, kind of resigned to the fact that she wouldn't be getting off the ship. And I had a conversation with her and the expedition leader, and she said, "I'm happy on here. I'm 92. I get to see Antarctica." He took it up upon himself then to get her off the ship. And so they strapped the wheelchair into the Zodiac, lifted her in and out. And I remember she said at the end, she said, "I might be 92, but I feel like a 5-year-old. This has been the best day of my life." And it was truly incredible. And that's where the passion of our expedition team, you know, they're not afraid of a challenge, especially that sort of thing. So although it's not possible at every possible port or destination that we do visit, we do our best to give absolutely everyone an incredible experience.
It's awesome. And it sounds like you are creating those lifetime memories and really helping people tick off that bucket list trip that they may have been aspired to do for years.
Absolutely.
Francesca, in terms of the Antarctic Heritage Trust, you mentioned obviously about some of your scientific expeditions and things like that, the one that's currently on. Does your team run those sorts of trips all year?
Yeah, it's a great question, Seb. So we tend to do our really large polar expeditions every couple of years. Obviously, we're just getting back into that following COVID and no international travel, etc. And we also offer a number of New Zealand-based expeditions as well, mostly for young New Zealanders, but occasionally we do open that up to other countries around the world. So we do have a full program of around 7 or 8 different experiences that we offer a year, and that includes our education program as well.
Yeah, wow, awesome. And because you obviously touched on the Inspiring Explorers youth expeditions, about how long in advance do people need to start applying for that sort of thing, and what type of people should apply?
Oh, great question. So we will generally advertise anywhere up to a year in advance for our expeditions, depending on what they might be. So something that is quite a bit more extreme, like the South Pole, will be a smaller team, and it will require a certain level of alpine ability, if that makes sense, or endurance and fitness. As you can imagine, skiing 1,000 kilometres to the South Pole, it's not something that I could personally do. But we do offer a number of other expeditions that don't require that elite level of fitness, if that makes sense. So that might be, for example, joining us on the Antarctic Peninsula on a ship-based expedition, where every day, as already been mentioned, you'll go out in the zodiacs, you might spend quite a bit of time kayaking. For those sorts of expeditions, there's no special physical requirements other than having a good level of fitness, if you can imagine, that would be important for getting out every day. But what we're looking for is young people who want to be inspired about the world, who want to come on this journey to get out of their comfort zone, to learn a little bit more about themselves and to build their explorer mindset. So we look back at the early polar explorers and we think about some of the incredible things they did, and we ask ourselves, what underpins that in terms of character values? So we talk about being curious, being resilient, leadership, teamwork, innovation. We call that our explorer mindset. And so the purpose behind our program is to help engender that in young people so that then they can come back and make a positive contribution to the world. And most importantly, get to know who they are as well.
That's awesome. And people that get the opportunity to go on these amazing expeditions, is it funded or partially funded, or how does that side of things work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it works in a number of different ways. We often do have partners that will actually help fund these expeditions. So they could be a corporate sponsor, philanthropic trust, a major donor. The trust will also contribute money, often from its reserves, for these long-term programs that we have planned. And also we ask young people to make a small financial contribution. So that might be $1,000 or $2,000. So as you all know, the cost of these trips can be expensive. So that's a very little amount of money compared to what it would actually cost per person to put it on. So it's a good model for us, and we're always looking for partners and sponsors to help us deliver this side of our program.
Nice. That's awesome. And it sounds like an amazing opportunity. We touched on obviously some of the physical requirements, and for some of the expeditions or activities once we're actually in destination, that people do have to, for certain activities, have to have a certain level of skill. Let's delve into that a little bit. Aaron, obviously, you've done a large number of expeditions down there, including summiting one of the highest peaks down there. From your perspective, what did you do to prepare for a trip like this? Not necessarily your summiting experience, because I assume that was quite a bespoke trip, but what advice would you give for someone who's, say, traveling to the region for the first time in terms of what they should try and do to make sure they get the most out of this experience?
Here's a great question, Seb. I mean, I think, in some ways Bianca touched on it with the key thing is everyone will have a different goal in mind when they go down there. And for some people, it's being as active as possible. For some people, it's actually just seeing the place. And I mean, physically, you're not going to be doing these huge hiking days unless you sign up for a trip that, say, crosses South Georgia or runs a marathon in Antarctica, of which you can do some of those sort of things. But, in reality, your best training is actually just being physically fit as you would most days. You don't require a great level of fitness. It's probably more a mindset, a mental set, because the one thing that I find is people go with a set itinerary, and Antarctica is a unique place. It's driven by weather, it's driven by the environment, and you never know what you're going to get each day. So it's not about the physical training, it's about the mental ability to just be prepared to be like an explorer, and you never know what each day is going to happen. You may wake up one morning, it's a snowstorm, you may not be able to launch a Zodiac, you may be stuck on the ship. That's the reality of being in the polar environment. So I think that's important to understand, that no day is the same as the last, and be prepared for the unexpected and the unknown. But that's part of the joy of going on a journey, right? The other thing I would just touch on with that, Seb, is equipment, just quickly. The one thing I would say is be prepared with the right equipment. And what I mean by that is, if you're a photographer, make sure you've got all the gear you need before you go. Chargers, lenses, the right equipment. Make sure you've got the right warm layers, particularly layering. You'll get, generally, most ships give you a polar jacket and boots to go ashore, but you need a lot of other layers, sunglasses, like hats, gloves. Make sure all that's sorted before you arrive, because you can't just buy that easily down there. You can't get into Ushuaia and buy that equipment. Basically plan to go with everything you need. A once in a lifetime trip. Don't shirk on the equipment side of it. Have a rope, and there's enough blogs online or other people's advice to get from that to make sure you take the right equipment. I think that's pretty important, just to touch on that side of prep, Seb, actually.
Definitely. And Bianca, I guess from your side of things, when a guest first gets in touch with you and goes through that booking process, what type of guidance and hand-holding do you give them throughout that process in terms of knowing what type of gear, and also let's just touch on the accessibility factor as well, in terms of, do you also help them organize their trips if they are flying in and out of Ushuaia?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll find that most of our Antarctic expeditions actually include pre-night's accommodation in the likes of Buenos Aires or Santiago. And then we actually charter planes in South America to ensure we can get our guests from Buenos Aires or Santiago down to Ushuaia and return. So that's all included in a lot of the fares that you would have seen me show before. It has these additional inclusions. So you've got those, your onboard experience is completely all inclusive. Your guiding from the team, interesting lectures, that's all included in the fare. So we make that obviously, it's knowledgeable straight up that, you know, this is what's included, and very rarely do you have to reach into your pocket. And then back to the accessibility side, we obviously do require some insight into our guests' mobility, into any illnesses and just their general overall physical well-being. So we do have a medical questionnaire that goes out that enables our medical team that we have to assess that basically it is the right expedition for you, just to make sure that both yours and our expectations are met. I think I covered everything there for you.
Yeah,
Seb.
no, that's awesome. And in terms of the Le Commandant Charcot, because that sounds like an incredibly innovative and groundbreaking vessel, how long was that in the making to actually create one of the first hybrid electric vessels going to the polar regions?
Yeah, so we've kind of had this, it's what we call our explore to inspire philosophy, and it goes really nicely with what Francesca's mentioned in terms of creating ambassadors for the places that we visit. And that's a key factor of our expeditions. So we couldn't possibly do that if we were operating with old diesel run ships, essentially. So that's whereby we did work on this project of Le Commandant Charcot. It was over 6 years. And then it was launched just last year in 2021. And now we're on to our next undertaking, I guess, which is looking at alternative fuels once again. So whether that be hydrogen powered vessels or the like, basically adopting a model that moves away from regular fossil fuels. So that's something that our company does really well. And we've been awarded on multiple times year after year, is our sustainability practices in the tourism and travel space. So something that's really exciting and really fantastic, I think.
That's awesome. And we've had some inquiries from high net worth travelers as well. And, you know, sometimes we have requests that they book, you know, premium rooms or owner suites and things like that. Is the configuration on board Le Commandant Charcot, are they all the same rooms or are there different tiers?
No, absolutely. So the image that I showed earlier, that was our lead-in stateroom. So that starts with a prestige stateroom. It's still beautiful, functional. It has a private balcony. And then we go up from there. There's around about 6 different categories to choose from. So then catering to everyone's both budgets and requirements when it comes to space and creature comforts as well.
Awesome. And at exploreGO, like part of our ethos is giving back with every adventure, and whereby a percentage of every booking that comes through exploreGO goes back to a local initiative, whether that's a community or environmental initiative within the local area where the experience takes place. So I guess, Francesca, outside of obviously purchasing and enjoying the Shackleton whiskey, tell us some other ways that people can support your course.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. So we always welcome donors, however big or small, and those donations can be made directly to our website, And you can support any of our programs, from conservation, our youth program to our education program. We're currently undertaking creating virtual reality experiences all of the historic huts so that we can take those out to the world for the people that aren't lucky enough to be able to go there themselves. And of course, we know that that is most people. So we do seek partners for those big projects as well. We also have the opportunity to become an Antarctic Explorer Club member. So we have some different layers of membership for the bronze, silver, gold, which again can be purchased through our website, and there's some benefits that go with that. So those are the main ways that people can support us. We also do have a little bit of merchandise available on our website, and some of that is stuff that we profit a little bit from, like the whiskey, but also some really neat things like books, t-shirts, etc. So that's something that people can check out as well.
Awesome.
And I think a really good point to note there is, you know, when people book with exploreGO as well, so let's say they book a Pontiac trip, it doesn't cost them any more to book with us, but 10% of that booking fee, you know, the customer can decide where they want that to go. And I would strongly recommend, having been to the historic huts that Antarctic Heritage Trust looks after, you know, that fee they can nominate to go to the Antarctic Heritage Trust. Because I think, you know, just having been there and experienced it, I can attest to how incredible, you know, if you're going to Antarctica and you want to support a good cause in Antarctica, the Antarctic Heritage Trust just does such an amazing job. Not just, and what I love what you've done, Francisco, is you haven't just preserved the huts of history, you're actually now inspiring the future explorers who will carry that legacy on. And I'm just such a strong supporter of that. And I think when people get to go and see that, if they're lucky enough to get to go and see that themselves, even if it's virtual reality, they'll go, wow, this is incredible. So I'd just like to just do a bit of a shout out there, because I think it's incredible what you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. And actually, I will just mention that we're really grateful when we partner with operators going to the Ross Sea, like Punant, that we do host charity auctions on board with the expedition leaders. And so people can actually bid on items like the whiskey and different things that we put up. And that's a wonderful way to support us if you are on board one of the ships like the Charcot. There is also a passenger contribution fee that is paid as part of that. If you do happen to visit any or all of the sites, it's one set fee, and that does come back to the trust and goes 100% to our programs. So we're really proud to say that every dollar given, 100% of that dollar goes to our programs. And that's thanks to the New Zealand government, who gives us a little bit of support for our admin costs. So if you are thinking of donating, 100% of it will go to program.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, guys. Bianca, Francesca, and Aaron. And obviously for people tuning into this webinar, feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or queries about organising your own Antarctic expedition. Aaron's a very seasoned veteran down in this area and can provide that personal experience to really make sure that this is a true bucket list trip and very memorable experience for you. So thank you all for joining in. Reach out with your questions, and we look forward to supporting you on your next adventure. See you later.